The forest closed around them like a living thing, each branch scraping their faces as if warning them to turn back. 7 men, rifles slung over their shoulders, hearts hammering with a mixture of greed and dread, trudged toward the silhouette of the house. It sat where the trees grew thickest, a skeletal shadow of stone and rotting wood, windows gaping like eyes long dead. The air smelled of decay and smoke, the remnants of fires that had consumed unknown occupants generations before. The 7 hunters approached the house under a sky heavy with the gray weight of an impending storm, the forest around them seeming to close in with every step. Their boots sank into the soft earth, leaves clinging to them as though trying to pull them back, warning them of the danger that lay ahead. Each man carried more than just a rifle. They carried ambition, fear, and a hunger for control over a secret they did not fully understand. The house emerged slowly from the shadows, its jagged silhouette against the darkening sky resembling a broken tooth in the jaw of the forest. Windows, some shattered and others intact but blackened with age, stared blankly at the hunters, reflecting only the tension that had begun to coil in their chests. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of rot and damp wood, a scent that seemed to cling to their lungs and slow their movements. But none dared to turn back. As they crossed the threshold, the world seemed to shift subtly, the forest falling away and the house opening like a wound in reality. The floorboards groaned under the weight of their steps, each creak sounding louder than the last, echoing through hallways that stretched longer than logic allowed. The hunters exchanged uneasy glances, eyes darting to corners where shadows pooled unnaturally, moving as if alive, yet revealing nothing when examined closely. The walls seemed to whisper, carrying the faint echoes of past inhabitants, their voices half heard murmurs that teased at memories or fears the men could not name. Each breath seemed to hang heavier in their lungs, each movement slower, as though the house was testing them, gauging how easily it could manipulate their senses. They had come with certainty, armed with confidence and the knowledge that they were men of power in the world outside these woods. But that certainty faltered almost immediately. One hunter swore he felt a draft where none should exist, while another thought he glimpsed a child peering at them from the end of a hallway that had not been there moments before. Anxiety began to seep into their minds, tiny at first, then building into a creeping, insistent presence that gnawed at the edges of their reason. The house seemed to pulse with a rhythm of its own, a slow, deliberate heartbeat beneath the floorboards that made each step feel like a trespass against something alive. The boy they sought was not merely a target, but a key, and the hunters had no idea that the true challenge was not in finding him, but in surviving the house that had long ago learned how to ensnare all who dared enter. The air grew colder as they moved further in, their eyes adjusting to darkness that seemed to thicken rather than recede. A single broken chandelier hung from the ceiling, swinging slightly despite the absence of wind, casting fractured shadows that danced across the walls. Every instinct screamed for caution, but pride and greed pressed them forward. Each hallway appeared familiar yet subtly altered. Doors that should have led to familiar rooms opened onto voids or staircases that spiraled downward impossibly. The hunters began to realize that the house was not merely abandoned. It was sentient in its design, aware of their intrusion, responding to their presence with subtle manipulations that made their senses betray them and their confidence crumble. The first sign that the boy was more than a mere child came when one of the hunters reached for a door at the end of a narrow hallway, expecting it to lead to another room, and found only darkness stretching impossibly far before him. He stepped forward, and the floor beneath him seemed to shift, tilting slightly as though the house itself were breathing beneath his feet. A soft laugh, almost melodic and impossibly light, echoed from somewhere above, below, and all around at once. It was not a sound that could belong to anyone human, yet it carried a familiarity that made the men's skin crawl. The boy emerged then, appearing almost at random, as if the house itself had deposited him there, his eyes unnervingly calm, watching the hunters with a quiet intelligence that spoke of patience far beyond his years. There was no resistance in his movements, only an eerie grace, and with a subtle gesture, he seemed to guide them deeper into the labyrinthine interior without a word. The hunters felt the first real sting of fear, the recognition that they were no longer masters of the situation, and that the boy, so small and fragile in appearance, held an advantage they could not begin to measure. Doors that had once seemed solid began to vanish. Hallways twisted impossibly, and objects moved subtly when no one was looking. A chair that had been at the side of the room was suddenly in the center. A broken mirror reflected angles that could not exist in reality, and a staircase led not to the basement, but to an endless descent that defied physics. One hunter reached out to steady himself on a railing, and the boy's soft whisper carried over his shoulder, mocking yet calm, and the railing collapsed as if it had never been there, leaving him clinging desperately to nothing. The men began to argue, their voices rising with fear and frustration, but the boy remained untouched by their panic, observing with an almost surgical detachment. He seemed to anticipate their movements, appearing at the exact moment they thought they had a chance to corner him, vanishing when they tried to approach, leaving only the echo of his laughter behind. A door slammed somewhere in the distance, startling them all, and one of the hunters called out, only to receive a faint reply from the shadows that made no sense. A voice not quite the boy's, yet mimicking him with uncanny precision. Panic took root as reality itself began to feel untrustworthy. Shadows stretched unnaturally. Sounds of footsteps echoed where no one had walked, and the faint smell of smoke and decay seemed to move with the hunters, following them from room to room. It became clear that the boy was not merely hiding. He was controlling the environment around them, manipulating the house like an extension of his will. Their confidence waned, replaced by an oppressive anxiety, as they realized that their prey was not helpless, and that the house itself was an accomplice in his escape, turning their hunt into a carefully orchestrated trap that left them unsure of what was real, what was illusion, and what horrors awaited at the next corner. The tension among the hunters began to crack almost immediately, small fissures widening into dangerous chasms as the house's oppressive influence seeped into their minds. At first, it was subtle, a fleeting doubt, a hesitation before opening a door, the sense that someone's gaze lingered just a moment too long. But the boy's presence, coupled with the unnatural shifts in the house itself, magnified every insecurity, every suppressed fear. Whispers echoed through the hallways, faint at first, but growing louder with each step, twisting the hunter's thoughts into suspicions that could not be ignored. One man swore he saw another reach for a weapon in a manner meant not for protection, but for betrayal. Another claimed the reflections in the broken mirrors mocked him, showing him committing acts he could not recall, or warning him that his companions were plotting against him. Every glance exchanged carried the weight of accusation. Every shadow became a potential threat, and the thin line between reality and imagination began to crumble. As they moved deeper into the house, the air grew heavier, the shadows thicker, and the floor beneath them seemed less stable. The hunters' nerves frayed with each step, paranoia infecting their decisions. Alliances that had seemed solid outside these walls began to falter. One hunter, convinced that another had secretly conspired with the boy to lead him into danger, lunged in sudden rage, only to find himself thrown off balance by the floor shifting beneath him, hitting the wall with a sickening thud. Another, trembling uncontrollably, whispered accusations of theft, of secret pacts, of imagined betrayals that left the group arguing amidst the echoing halls. The boy appeared occasionally, silently observing, a quiet catalyst for the distrust that spiraled among them, never needing to act aggressively to maintain control. His presence alone was enough to turn friends into foes and amplify the fear that had already begun to take root. The house itself seemed to feed on the growing paranoia, manipulating perception and memory in subtle ways. Staircases led to rooms that should have been familiar, but were now distorted. Walls stretched at impossible angles, and doors opened to places that contradicted the natural order. The hunters could no longer trust the physical layout of the house, and even their memories of what they had passed moments before became unreliable. The boy's soft laughter would drift from one end of a hallway to the other, sometimes seeming to mimic the hunters' own voices, making them question whether their thoughts were truly their own or implanted by the house. Their fear became a tangible force, pulling them apart as individual doubts transformed into violent suspicion. Soon, the group fractured entirely, each man acting independently, driven not by strategy but by the raw terror gnawing at his mind. Arguments erupted over doors that led nowhere, hallways that twisted back upon themselves, and glimpses of the boy that vanished the instant they tried to confront him. Trust dissolved entirely, replaced by a primal self-preservation that the house seemed to anticipate, nudging each hunter toward his own undoing. What had begun as a coordinated hunt devolved into a chaotic scramble. The line between hunter and hunted blurred beyond recognition, as the boy's cunning manipulation and the house's malevolent presence turned the men into prey of their own fears. The discovery of the hidden cellar shifted the hunter's fear into something far more tangible, a dread that weighed on them like chains around their ankles. A trapdoor concealed beneath a rug, worn thin by years of neglect, gave way under their combined weight, revealing a staircase descending into a darkness that seemed almost alive, swallowing their lantern's light as they moved downward. The air grew colder with each step, carrying the scent of smoke, decay, and something indefinably old, a stench that clung to their clothes and hair, as if determined to mark them as trespassers. At the bottom, the cellar stretched wider than the house above should have allowed, a cavernous chamber lined with shelves and boxes containing the remains of previous intruders. Charred bones, blackened remnants of clothing, and cracked personal items told stories of men and women who had come before, who had been lured by curiosity, greed, or necessity, and who had never returned. The realization struck with a horrifying clarity. The house had claimed them, as it now claimed the 7 hunters. The boy moved among the shelves with a grace that was almost unnatural, his small frame seemingly unaffected by the oppressive atmosphere. He gestured subtly, almost inviting them to inspect the relics, and the hunters felt a strange compulsion to obey, as if the house itself demanded participation in this morbid display. Each artifact whispered a warning through memory and imagination. A boot smeared with blood that was not yet dry, a diary scorched in the middle pages, but perfectly preserved at the edges, an old rifle whose trigger had been pulled long after its owner had perished. The men's hands shook as they touched these remnants, a visceral understanding spreading that the house did not simply trap. It destroyed, consumed, and reshaped the very essence of those who entered. Every creak of the floorboards above, Every shift in the shadows of the cellar suggested that the house was not only watching, but interacting, aware of their terror, adapting to it, and feeding on it. Some hunters tried to argue or laugh off the horror, but even the bravest voice faltered under the weight of evidence. One of them dropped a lantern in sudden panic, and the flame flickered wildly before settling, illuminating a corner where the shadows seemed to coil into the shape of figures, too vague to be real, but too defined to dismiss. The boy's eyes met each hunter's in turn, calm and knowing, reflecting the certainty that escape would not come through force or cleverness alone. The house had become an accomplice, a silent predator that bent architecture, perception, and memory into tools of entrapment. Every turn and hesitation became a choice orchestrated by the house. Every instinct questioned, every hope subverted. The hunters' panic intensified as they realized that survival depended not on brute strength, but on navigating a maze that was alive, conscious, and intent on their undoing. Whispers seemed to rise from the walls themselves, echoes of the boys' laughter mingling with the voices of those long consumed, a chorus that reminded the men that the cellar was merely one layer of the house's design. The deeper they delved, the more apparent it became that the boy was both guide and guardian, and the house, patient and ancient, was orchestrating a trial of terror that left no room for hesitation or mercy, each step forward drawing them closer to the fate that had already claimed countless others by the time dawn began to seep through the broken windows. Only one of the 7 hunters remained, staggering through the forest with limbs trembling from exhaustion, fear, and disbelief. The night had been a relentless assault on his senses, a maze of impossible hallways, shifting shadows, and the boy's quiet, unnerving presence that had manipulated the house itself into a predator of flesh and mind. Each step he took was hesitant, his ears straining for sounds that could be either real or the lingering echo of terror imprinted on his memory. He was alone, yet every rustle of leaves, every crack of a branch beneath his foot, reminded him that the night had left its mark, that he was no longer merely a man but a survivor shaped by the horrors he had endured. The forest seemed unnaturally still, as though holding its breath for the one who had escaped, its silence both a relief and a new kind of terror, suggesting that the house's influence might extend far beyond its walls. The boy was gone, leaving behind only the faintest trace of his presence, a memory of small, intelligent eyes that seemed to peer into the soul and vanish before comprehension could solidify. The surviving hunter could not shake the sensation that he had been manipulated at every turn, that his own choices had been illusions crafted to feed the house's appetite. Every glance over his shoulder carried the weight of suspicion, fear that the boy might still be watching, waiting to reclaim what the house had allowed to escape for a fleeting moment. He remembered the screams, the arguments, the betrayals among his companions, and the certainty that the house had orchestrated, each moment with meticulous attention, its architecture and shadows acting as instruments of his undoing. Relief mingled with the residue of panic, leaving his mind fractured, every thought carrying the echo of what he had witnessed, and every memory tinged with doubt about what had been real. As he stumbled through the underbrush, scratches and bruises marking his body, he noticed signs of his companions, fates a boot snagged on a root, a rifle discarded in haste, smears of blood long dried into the earth. The realization that the house had claimed all but one was a cold clarity, a truth he could not deny even as exhaustion threatened to collapse him into the soil. The path ahead seemed simple in comparison to the labyrinth behind him. Yet he knew that simplicity was an illusion. The world beyond the house's reach no longer felt familiar, and the boy's absence did not mean freedom. Eventually, he emerged into the pale light of early morning, the forest thinning to reveal the outskirts, where the village might have been. Yet he was changed irrevocably, marked by fear and memory in ways that no one could see, but that would define him forever. He was the only one left to tell the tale, though the story he carried was fractured, incomplete, and terrifyingly incomprehensible. The house loomed behind him, silent once more, waiting, patient and eternal. And somewhere deep within its walls, the boy remained, a quiet, calculating presence that had orchestrated everything, leaving the survivor to stagger into the light, alive but forever haunted.